Hey guys, welcome into the 14. I'm Nick Cole, and we're breaking down each SEC football game and bowl season from a betting perspective. Today, we're talking about the college football playoff. This is the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic featuring the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Cincinnati Bearcats. This game is going to be played on Friday, December 31st at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time in AT&T Stadium, aka Jerry's World in Arlington, Texas. It'll be broadcast on ESPN. From a betting perspective, this game opened with Alabama as a 13.5-point favorite, and that's held true for most of the period between the opening line and today as of the recording of this video. And the over-under for this game opened at 58, and that is also where we're at as we record this one. Bring in our betting analyst, Christopher Smith. Christopher, this is what we've been waiting for all season, to get a chance to see the college football playoff. We've got a couple of SEC teams in it, one in each game. How do you feel about the Crimson Tide coming into this one?
Yeah, finally. I mean, I love bowl season, and I've always loved bowl season, but it's getting harder and harder to love the entire bowl season with all the opt-outs, COVID opt-outs, transfers, coaches leaving early because of the early signing period. But the one thing you can still count on is that the teams in the college football playoff are playing to win. So thankfully we get a good game, a real game for these two semifinals, and I'm ready to break it down. But why don't you tell us first about the weather, if that's a factor, and then if there are any injuries in this game, and then get into the next news and notes.
Sure. So let's start with the weather in Arlington. We're a couple days out recording this, but the forecast is showing temperatures in the 70s at kickoff. We get winds forecasted between 10 to 15 miles per hour and about a 40% chance of rain. I'd say, however, remember, Jerry's World is a retractable roof stadium, and it's unclear if it'll be open or closed on the day of the game. However, reports from practices in the days leading up to the game have indicated that the roof has been closed during practice. So I would think that we could anticipate there's a good chance that they'll close that roof if there's any sort of inclement weather or things that could impact the game from a weather standpoint. So I bet with that in mind. On the injury side of things, let's start with Alabama first. Obviously, wide receiver John Mechie, the third, got injured in the SEC championship game and is out for this one, as well as cornerback Josh Jobe. He's also out for this one. We've talked all season long about Alabama's depth issues at running back behind Brian Robinson, who's been banged up himself at times this season, but he should be playing. However, the three running backs who have been out for a long time now for the Tide, we don't expect to see them back in time for this one. There's been some buzz about outside linebacker Christopher Allen returning to this game, but we need to wait until probably hours before kickoff before we can feel good calling that one way or the other. Wide receiver, punt returner JoJo Earle is questionable for this one. And then we've also got some coaching staff issues to watch for. Offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien and offensive line coach Doug Marrone are expected to be back from COVID in time for the game. But, if they're, I check before the game starts to make sure you've got the proper play caller in place on offense for the Tide, if that matters to you as you're betting this one, both from a side or a total perspective. On the Cincinnati side of things, kicker Cole Smith has been out since October. We don't expect to see him back. Cincinnati has pretty much avoided kicking field goals to an extreme since they lost him. So that's another thing to consider going into this one when you're looking at picking a side or a total. On the news and notes side, I just sort of set the table for this one and let you get into the betting analysis, Christopher. Looking at Alabama, the question I think most people have is Alabama actually peaking at the right time, or are we making a little bit too much out of one good game? I mean, that you sort of the devil and angel on each shoulder asking these questions as you think about how to bet this game. As much as the Crimson Tide could shock the world, being a perennial college football playoff team, they kind of did that in the SEC championship game. I think the national narrative was that Georgia was the better team going into that game and that Georgia was going to win that game, and they just came out and smacked the Bulldogs around. And the outcome was they are the number one seed in the college football playoff after all, after spending much of the last part of the regular season wondering if they would even get in. But, looking at, that's the good side. And then on the bad side of this, you look at just the week before that, the last time we saw Alabama before the SEC championship game, they were being shut out in the fourth quarter by Auburn in the Iron Bowl. And it took late minute heroics to even get that game into overtime and then to win it in 4 overtimes. I think a lot of people would have considered them fortunate to even be in a position where winning that Georgia game got them into the college football playoff. So it's trendy to say that Alabama is king again, and a lot of people watched that Georgia game and decided, hey, this is the Alabama that they've always been. But Christopher, you and I have talked about there have been some warts on this team through the season, and it's going to be interesting to see which version of it we see after they've had the better part of a month to prepare for an opponent. On the other sideline, we've got Cincinnati, and the question around that program has been for the last 2 or 3 months, really the same thing is, do they actually belong in this game? Do they belong in the college football playoff? It's a group of 5 team, and right or wrong, they're going to sort of carry that on their back for outcome of this game may impact the way that group of 5 teams are viewed in terms of college football playoff for the next 10 years. And so, I don't know if the college kids necessarily have that in the back of their mind. They're trying to win a national championship, right? But it does bring a certain amount of chip on the shoulder for some of the coaching staff, maybe, and the players involved to an extent. Do they relish this role as the underdog? Do they like the fact that everybody thinks that they don't, so sort of playing that underdog story? Because they're going to need to embrace the fact that this could not only impact their future in the college football playoff, but their conference and many other teams. The schedule that they played this year wasn't necessarily elite, but they are 13-0. They're the AAC conference champions. They did beat Notre Dame at Notre Dame, which is sort of their signature win that they've been hanging their hat on. And they won their conference championship game against an 11-win Houston team who played Auburn in the Birmingham Bowl. So impressive at spots, but none of that is Alabama. And then when we get to betting this game and you look at a line of 13.5, you're almost having to lay 2 touchdowns if you're betting the Tide here. Christopher, how do we make money on this? How do we account for such a lopsided line and such an important game?
Yeah, you mentioned Alabama maybe being fortunate to make the college football playoff, especially, they had a 1 possession win against Arkansas, 1 possession win against LSU. It wasn't, and then the Florida game was also an escape. So it wasn't just the Iron Bowl. Certainly agree there, but I think the thing that really matters for Alabama and Georgia is the number 1 seed this year was probably more important than it has been in quite some time with Cincinnati in the 4 spot, because it's a different story if you're facing Georgia or Michigan in the semifinal as opposed to Cincinnati. So I do think from a sports betting perspective, these books are always going to juice the line in favor of Alabama in a high-profile matchup with a lot of casual bettors. And so I think anytime you're looking at a college football semifinal, especially against a group of 5 team, there's probably value on the underdog to an extent as opposed to what the power ratings would say. But the thing with Alabama all year that's an issue, everybody just kind of lumps in, oh, their defense isn't that good, or this is not a Nick Saban defense from 5 or 10 years ago. But the thing is, Alabama's run defense is very quietly number 1 in the nation in Pro Football Focus's grades on film, and also number 2 in yards per carry allowed and number 3 in EPA per snap. So I'm not sure people realize necessarily nationally that this is a really, really good Alabama run defense, better than Georgia's statistically. And Jerome Ford, the Cincinnati running back, of course, is a Alabama transfer. So if Alabama needs any motivation to stop the run in this game, Cincinnati does run on nearly 55% of its snaps. And it is top 10 in most relevant metrics for running the football. But look at the last 3 times that Alabama played this season against SEC competition. Georgia averages 5.3 yards per carry. Alabama held them to 3.6. Auburn, 4.8. Alabama held them to 0.6 yards per carry. Arkansas, 4.9. Alabama held them to 2.6 yards per carry. So if Cincinnati can't be effective running the football because of how good Alabama's run defense is, at least, maybe Desmond Ridder can tuck and run. He hasn't done that as much this season as he used to. They haven't needed him to. But in this game, if they can't find some way to run the ball, it's going to put a lot of pressure on them in every other phase because, Ridder is experienced and he's a competent passer. And Cincinnati has become a competent offense overall. But this is a team that's still built to run the football and play defense. And if you're not running the football and you're not scoring because your passing game is not elite, that puts even more pressure on your defense. So it all works together here. According to Pro Football Focus, speaking of that defense, Cincinnati claims the 3rd best coverage grade in all of FBS. Georgia is number 1. Nick, you talked about what Alabama did to that Georgia defense, but honestly, in my opinion, Cincinnati's secondary is better than Georgia's. They've got an All-American cornerback in Ahmad Sauce Gardner. They have Kobe Bryant at the other cornerback spot, and they have Brian Cook at safety. All three of those guys are going to get drafted in the NFL draft this spring. Alabama also has the number 2 pass offense, according to Pro Football Focus. So it's strength on strength there. But of course, as you mentioned, Nick, no John Mechie III. So it's kind of up to Jamison Williams. And he's had more than 123 yards in 6 of the last 8 games for Alabama. Of course, the 2 exceptions are when he got kicked out of the game due to targeting early against Auburn. And then against Mississippi State, he had 77 yards in a 40-point win. Not really necessary there. So no defense has been able to stop Williams. And he's faced plenty of NFL cornerbacks in the SEC. So we'll see if Cincinnati elects to maybe double team him or how they try to play Williams, because he's the guy you triple star right now in the passing game for Alabama. And to me, though, the questions that may really better solve whether Cincinnati can stop Jamison Williams, maybe more, number one, can they pressure Bryce Young? We know that he's been sacked at least 4 times in 4 games. That was the loss to Texas A&M, the overtime game against Auburn, and then the 1 possession home wins against LSU and Arkansas, which easily, Alabama easily did not cover the spread any of those 4 games. And, the Cincinnati often runs a 3-3-5 base defense. Normally that's a defense that's smaller and faster. And so if you're a team like Alabama, you think maybe you can punish them physically in the running game. But if they can't do that, Brian Robinson, you mentioned he's been banged up and stuff like that throughout the season. He's carried a huge load, especially in the second half of the season. Perhaps the layoff from December 5th to December 31st is going to be a big help to him to be able to carry the ball 20 plus times in this game. And if they can do that, if Alabama can succeed on the ground, then Cincinnati is going to have to, commit more players to going into the box to stop the run. That will make it even harder for them to contain Williams and some of the other Alabama receivers that are going to step up in place of Mechie. But Nick, before we get into your pick, do you have any sort of New Year's Eve related gifts that you want to give to our audience as well?
Yeah, let's get 2022 rolling right on the betting side of things. Bowl season's obviously in full swing here, and Action 24/7 Sportsbook is celebrating with special deals for new customers. So for limited time only, you can get a deposit match up 100% up to $800. So if you sign up today and make your first deposit with code SOUTH14, that's SOUTH14, Action will double your money up to $800. So download the app or go to visit action247.com to get started. Action 24/7 is by Tennesseans for Tennesseans, and you've got Action. And Christopher, when it gets to making a pick here, I have to admit, first of all, you got to admit your shortcomings. And I really have struggled having success betting Alabama this year. I think part of it is the shift in the way that they've had to play with early in the season. I had trouble understanding, how quickly they would mesh with a lot of pieces from last year's national championship team being replaced. And I just felt like I was missing in all the wrong spots, sometimes betting for them when I shouldn't, sometimes betting against them when I shouldn't. So when it comes to betting this one, I think I'm just going to default to the idea that when you give Nick Saban enough talent in the room, let his team get healthy, and give him the better part of a month to scheme for one opponent, and that opponent happens to be a group of 5 team, no matter how talented that team is, I'm just going to take the Tide and lay the 13.5 and trust that the guy who has as many national championships as any of them knows what he's doing here. And in terms of picking a total here, I think game script wise, if I'm going to go with Alabama, I like over 58, but I don't have a strong lean there, and I'm not necessarily advocating for making a unit bet on that or anything. How do you see this one?
Yeah, I mean, Cincinnati is a group of 5 team, and they are certainly outmatched man for man from a physical talent standpoint. But this is an Alabama team that almost lost to 6-6 in the regular season, Florida. I think they finished 6-7 with the bowl loss, a team that almost lost to an LSU team that is also 6-6 headed into their game, a team that took 4 overtimes to beat a 6-6 Auburn team that, pending the result of their bowl, may finish 6-7. So I don't think that it's wild to think that Cincinnati can compete with certainly any of those teams that Alabama almost lost to, and maybe with Alabama as well. I do think that if Alabama's offense is able to do mostly what they want to do in this game, then it's very tough to find a path for Cincinnati to win, much less cover. But if Cincinnati is going to cover plus 13.5, it's going to be because the Cincinnati defense plays really well, in my opinion. So if you are going to bet on Cincinnati plus 13.5, which again, I think there's some value there just because of sports books wanting to keep their liability low on Alabama to a degree, knowing everyone's going to pile on for the Tide. If you think that Cincinnati is going to cover the spread, I think you think the under 58 is going to cash as well. So I think this is sort of a correlated play. If you are on Cincinnati, why not kind of parlay Cincinnati plus 13.5 with the under 58? And I don't think Alabama could cover whether the game is high scoring or low scoring. But for Cincinnati, I think the only way they cover is if the game is low scoring. So I may consider putting a little bit of money on sort of a correlated parlay there if there's a sports book out there that would allow you to do that. But Nick's on Alabama. I'm on Cincinnati. We're on opposite sides on the total as well. Should be an exciting game. Hopefully we get one, if not two SEC teams in the national title and you can run it back there. But for Nick Cole, I'm Christopher Smith for the 14, and good luck betting this game.